Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Joe Perfetti. Welcome to the latest edition of Office Hours. Today, we're going to talk about retention and engagement beyond fear and greed. And I'm very happy to have the MAPP team here. So, hi, Ken, Lisa, Chad. They have been recurring guests on the show. Basically, we're going to talk about the science behind retention. And as you probably saw in our promotion to the show, part of what we're focused on is that, this is some data from DDI that basically says 57% of people have quit their job because their manager sucks and they have moved on. And it really plays a role in retention. So the question is, how do you as a leader engage and retain your team to make sure that they are not one of the statistics that leave? And, when I was kind of naively thinking about this and talking to our team here, I was always under the impression that if you're just a manager, that there's only two things that matter: fear and greed, because that's what motivates employees. And so you either bribe them with greed or you scare the hell out of them with fear. As a matter of fact, I remember in 1996, I was doing a program for a paper company outside of Atlanta, and some HR people were there. And basically, they were trying to explain to these plant managers that ran paper mills this HR stuff. And they were the ones that actually said it. It's like, look, all we need is fear and greed to run our business. So we don't need anything else. In fact, they had T-shirts printed, fear and greed. And every time somebody talked something, fear and greed. So I'll start our show by asking our team here, is fear and greed enough?
I'll take a swing at it. So fear and greed will get compliance. Fear and greed do not tend to get loyalty, certainly. They're not going to get creativity. They're not going to get collaboration. And in today's, they're not going to get your best ideas. They're not going to get your best efforts. In today's environment, today's work environment, those are particularly critical. I think back to the Harvard Business School case of Lincoln Electric. If you're making widgets and it's a matter of making X number of widgets for X period of time, fear and greed can do a pretty good job. But if I think back to an episode from college, I was in a class, I was doing what I thought were terrific papers, and I got poor grades because it didn't meet that professor's expectations. I started altering what I did and giving what I didn't think was my best work to the professor. And if we make an analogy for a manager, if he were a manager, he would not be getting the full range of my ideas. He starts getting those ideas that are pre-thought out to be the ones that I think he's already going to like.
So is that a metric that we can actually use for our employees to see whether or not our employees are engaged? That how they deliver ideas to us?
Well, I think I think we want to address something first. I think with the advent of progressive HR starting around probably 2008, people realize that fear and greed is no longer an acceptable way to run a company. Realization and implementation are two very different things, though. And what I've noticed is that let's take construction, fear and greed as a concept. How do you get the most out of your team? You get them to respect you, and you make sure that they know that this is the best hourly wage that they'll get anywhere else. Well, that's an idea for compliance, but you're capping your talent. And if you think about a progressive tech company, it may not be fear and greed, but it's always threatening that there's someone else that wants your spot. And I think a lot of the times managers don't have any other tools in their toolkit, so they'll fall back to derivatives of fear and greed because that's all they know how to do. And so now I think before we even get to the metric conversation, there needs to just be an awakening in managers of what are the adjectives that I use to describe my direct reports, and what are the behaviors that I know in terms of directing and guiding my team.
So what would some of those be?
Well, let's talk about retention and engagement. We know that losing top talent is an issue across all industries. And so one of the best ways to keep someone at your company is to give them work that they like to do. And that is a really simple sentence, but most managers don't think about, does Ken like what he does every day? And if he doesn't, like, how do I give him a project that he likes? Because we know that meaning and purpose are deeply tied to retention, right? You increase your retention rates by over 60% by giving someone work that has high meaning and high purpose. So that's just one place to start. And I think if you can give someone meaning and purpose, they're going to be much more engaged in their work.
I think there's another piece here that we're kind of talking about, which is prevention and promotion strategies and motivation. So fear and greed those are things that people kind of want to get away from the fear, right? They don't want to be punished. They don't want to kind of be beaten over the head and told, oh, you didn't do this good enough. And so that diminishes morale, that reduces engagement. But to Chad's piece, when we can give people meaning, a sense of connection to something that is bigger than themselves, a goal that they feel is important, ideally work that plays to their strengths as well. They get some autonomy around this. There's a whole bunch of pieces bundled up in this. But when they have something that they'll work towards, they'll work harder. They will be more loyal. They will be more engaged. They will be more creative. They will use more discretionary effort. They will reach out and build connections with other people, and they'll build collaborations. So, back to Ken's original point, if all this is about creating widgets on an assembly line, yeah, the research says that you can incentivize people up to a certain amount by telling them you'll pay them more if they work faster, more accurately. But that doesn't work for the majority of our knowledge workers today.
Yeah.
You literally, there's terrific research, Barbara Fredrickson, of course, on creativity going up as comfort and mood go up. When we get stressed, we tend to focus in more. We literally see more when we're in elevated mood. There was an experiment. I apologize. I don't have the researchers. In a hotel, they would have the person who is checking people in drop a pencil, and a different person would stand up. And they prime people to be in a better mood or a worse mood. And the goal was, what percentage of the people in different moods, and also men and women, et cetera, recognized that it was literally a different person who they were talking to who stood up with a pencil after having dropped it. And people who were primed to be more stressed or in a more negative mood, by and large, didn't notice. People who were primed to be in a better mood, what happened to the last guy?
Yeah.
If we take this into the world of not just creativity, but innovation, where you have a business imperative and you want people to be innovative because your business is based on patents, for example, or proprietary information and intellectual property. You want people to be in good moods. You want them to be loyal to your company. You want them to be able to think creatively. And if all you're doing is fear and greed, you're putting people into a negative emotional space. They're not going to be able to give you that innovation.
So I think, and this goes why I was thinking about the measurement. I think when we were talking earlier, if you're sitting around a conference room and you're the leader and you're asking people for ideas and nobody's basically saying anything, isn't that like a symptom that you're not doing it right?
That's something you're not doing it right, or people are really bored with your management style. Either way is it's not good. I remember being in meetings when I was started in banking, like our daily meetings before the trading hour started, and like the head of the desk would say something, and you just knew not to respond because there were going to be serious consequences for just engaging at all. And unfortunately, like as I joke about that, there are probably people that are sitting like in my seat right now where I was 10, 15 years ago, where that's the case. I do want to say that like the reticence is not good, but one place to loop back is that it's not only on the managers, right? Like the employee has to have a reason that they show up each day as well. And they can't say, well, my manager didn't give me meaning and purpose, so this is why I want to leave. And there's a culture right now where managers are blamed for a lot, where if you don't do the simple job of asking yourself the question, what do I want to get out of my workday today that's meaningful? Like, how many of us actually ask ourselves that question each day when we sit down to log onto our computer? I don't think most people do, right? And so what happens is you have this avalanche that slowly builds of being upset and not engaged in work, and then you blame your manager when 10 years ago you could have just asked yourself the question, how do I want to make this workday different?
So that kind of leads right into one of our first questions for the show, which is when we were setting up, we basically said, why is it important for managers to care when they ask a question? So why should I care? I mean, obviously, we talked about the idea of the statistics, but what else is behind this?
When you talk about asking a question, so if I'm asking a question, you're looking at what kind of answers I get back. I think of it more generally, more globally. What kind of environment are you creating? By the way, the piece that we missed for engagement and individual performance before, collaboration. If you're going to get collaboration, that comes from comfort, that comes from teamwork, that comes from the culture that you create. And fear and greed reduces collaboration dramatically. And in today's world, that just does not fly. Within a team, within a meeting, what types of activities, what types of habits do we have? They're going to tend to build more comfort, more respect, more engagement. The first thing that I'm thinking of is something called Active Constructive Responding, ACR. And ACR is we send out bids for attention in different ways. I have an idea. How someone responds to something that went well is for studies of longevity of relationships is more important than how we respond even to when things go poorly. So it's very important for example, for a manager or a partner to offer support when things are difficult. It's at least as important, and in many respects more important, how you respond when someone offers an idea. When someone offers, hey, this great thing happened today at work. I'm really excited about this. I'm going to be making this at home. I'm going to be making this new thing for dinner. There are different ways that people can respond, and those will either build trust, build engagement, or reduce trust and reduce engagement.
So let me just make sure I understand. So I'm sitting in my office doing my work. I get a knock on the door. Hey, Joe, do you have a minute to talk? You're telling me that that's a critical conversation?
It can be, absolutely. And rarely is it one conversation. It's usually a habit of conversations. So if I have a negative experience from that, I knock on your door, I come in, and you listen half-heartedly, I'm less apt to come back with my next idea. If you really knock it down, I'm much less apt. If I know that through my experience and the experience of others that that's your style, then rarely am I going to venture forward.
So I assume that if I am again promoting my idea, hey, I have an idea for whatever, I'm either at your tap you on the shoulder. Is there science behind this for ACR in terms of how you respond?
Oh, sure.
So can somebody kind of go through that for us?
I'm happy to take it.
Go ahead, Chad.
So just like looking at this matrix, I think what you want to, the science behind this is linked to how does my response in that moment help to lead to more collaboration or a stronger relationship? We know, right, just for like all organizational behavior change management studies that like the relationship between manager and direct report is correlated to that employee's desire to want to stay at the organization. All right, so if Joe is a sucky manager, that means my organization commitment goes down almost 100%. Worse than that, if my organization commitment goes down, that means that my retention or desire to stay is going to go down, which means that that company is going to have a 230% cost, right, to replacing Chad, ramping me back up. And that could all be because of a series of 3 knocks on the door where every time I tried to engage with Joe on something with my development, I was dismissed to the side. And so the question is, why should managers care? I think it's really 3 things. Productivity. You want to make sure you're getting the most out of Chad for the hours he's working each day. Psychological safety, making sure you're creating an environment where I actually feel like I can trust you with the things that are really going on. And really team-wide performance, which is different than individual productivity. Because if the team is performing, that corporate sense of collaboration and accomplishment is also critical to the health of the organization or your team. So how do you actually do that? You can really just be patient and be willing to ask the right questions. And a lot of the times managers they frankly don't want to or have the time to do it, because being a manager means that I have to do my job well while taking care of somebody else. And if you think about this COVID environment, like, you're a manager, at the same time, you're probably being a working parent. At the same time, you're trying to do your job. You're trying to figure out how to manage teams remotely. And if you're a manager and you don't care about that, you're actually just setting yourself up to be really inefficient, because you're going to have to spend more time double clicking into what's wrong because you weren't open, figuring out why your team's not performing because you don't have the desire to want to engage past, niceties. And so it's really important just for that productivity of the team and the performance and health of that organization to actually give a damn.
Yeah. But I want to go back to the framework.
Yeah,
So,
I want to pick up on that piece about the time, because I think that ties into this framework, Joe. So if you want to bring that framework back up, the key here is, like Ken said, people are going to come to you. They're going to knock on your door. They're going to ask for your attention anyways. And they might have something good to share with you. And so as the manager, you're going to respond in one of these 4 different ways. So let's say somebody comes to the door, right? Bang, bang, bang. Do you have a couple of minutes? Joe says, sure. And the person says, just wanted to let you know, we just signed the Smith contract. Good news, right? Good news. So Joe, how you as a manager respond has a direct impact on the engagement of that employee in the moment. Because you could say, oh man, we just signed the Smith contract. That's a lot of work. I don't know how we're going to be able to do that. That is an active destructive response. That's pointing out the negative. That's quashing that good news. If I've come to you with that, I'm going to walk away feeling totally demoralized. Or if I come to your door, knock, knock, knock. Hey, we just signed the Smith contract. Joe is my manager. You could say, oh yeah, huh? Okay. And go back to your work. And now I've been ignored. That's a passive destructive response. And I feel like, why am I even bothering here? Joe doesn't care. So now I don't care. That's reduced my engagement as well. Third option, bang, bang, bang. We just won the Smith contract. And Joe looks up and says, oh, nice, good news. Thumbs up, and goes back to working. I think a lot of managers will do this. They'll do like a nod of the head and like, yeah, good job. Way to go. Pat on the head. You should feel proud about yourself. But that's a very understated response. The best way a manager could respond in this moment is what we're calling active constructive responding. That's what the research says, where Joe would actually turn towards me. He would put aside what it is that he's working on, saying, really? We got the Smith contract? That's awesome. You signed. Come in and tell me about it. What did you go through? What made that work? How are you feeling about this? That's a real gold star on your employee record. Tell me about what it was that worked well. What are you looking forward to most about doing this work? Who else are you going to involve with you? Tell me about what it is that you've done up to this point to make it successful. And that's called capitalizing. When we can ask the questions, when we can get excited with the person about their good news, be that a new car, be that they just painted their living room walls, be that their kid is starting their first day of kindergarten, whatever that good news is, let's take the time, respond to them, And the biggest pushback I get from this from managers is, well, I don't have the time to be nice to everybody who walks in my door. But to Chad's point, if you don't do it, you're going to be picking up the pieces later. It's a pay me now or pay me later sort of thing. And the reality is you're going to respond anyways. It really does not take that much longer to do the active constructive responding. And that builds your relationship capital with these people, because there will be difficult conversations down the road. But if you've got that trust, if you've got that mutual respect, if you've got that foundation of positivity, Joe and I can have all sorts of conversations because he took the time to turn to me and to make me feel good about sharing good news. So that's how this model comes together.
Lisa, and I want to make sure to get back to your question about the data, why we beyond the theory. The other piece that I hear from people, and I feel at times, is I don't want to be inauthentic. It's a bad idea. I don't care about your kids starting kindergarten. What then?
So I take this into the parenting realm, Ken. I have a couple of teenagers, and I say, us as parents, like, we inadvertently do this all the time. Your kid comes to you and says, I just got the lead in the school play. And because I'm a kind, loving parent, I say to my kid, you got the lead in the school play. You don't even have time to get your calculus homework done. How are you going to memorize all those lines? Like, honest to God here, kid, what were you thinking? And that's not the best response to have with my kid, right? Presumably, I want a great relationship with them. So capitalize first. They are happy. I want to meet them emotionally where they're at. You got the lead in the school play. That's great. Tell me about the play. Tell me about the audition. Tell me about when it's going on. We'll buy tickets for opening night. Now that we've celebrated, a little bit later, maybe later that night, maybe the next day, I'm going to sit my kid down and say, okay, I am really super proud of you that you got that role. And we need to talk about time management. We need to talk about how all this is going to fit in. We need to talk about rehearsals, transportation, meals, all those logistical parts. I can do that, but if you want to build those positive relationships, I want to meet them emotionally where they are first. The other thing I will say to that, Ken, is we can come at this through questions, especially in the workplace. Oh, I think it would be a really good idea if we put together a proposal for this RFP, and you're looking at it with your years of experience and you're saying that is weeks of work, and that particular contract, like, we almost never win those sorts of things. Yeah, it would be great if we got it, but chances of success, 5%. Is this really something we want to bid on? Like, okay, let me ask you a few questions about that. You look really excited about it. Tell me, what is it that's making you excited about this? So I can still capitalize. I can still acknowledge that they've got something that they think is a great idea. And then I might turn it around and say, okay, so in my experience with this particular RFP proposal, we tend not to get those. So tell me, have you gone back and looked in the history? What's going to be different about this particular proposal? Here are some obstacles I foresee. How do you propose we would overcome those? So we sit down and schedule another couple of meetings to assess the feasibility of doing this RFP. And asking those questions is a better way of engaging the employee and inviting them in while we're still capitalizing with them because they're excited about this possibility. We don't want to quash that, but we do want to temper it with some sort of realism once we've met them emotionally where they're at.
So again, just to be practical, and I appreciate the suggestions there, and I'll put up the chart. Matter of fact, here's version 2 to amplify, as you were talking about. But what do you do when you're in the team meeting and somebody just has a really dumb idea? Like, how do you praise somebody for idiocy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say you're not praising them for idiocy, but you can ask them some good questions about it. I know Ken and Chad will have a few thoughts on this as well.
I'm going to jump in for a second. Joe, you know my friend Bob Culhan.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
So he's an adjunct professor at Fuqua Business School, I believe USC, maybe UCLA. And his background is improv. He wrote a book called Getting to Yes and.
Yeah.
The first thing that I think of is there's almost no statement that you can't start with at least an acknowledgement, at least a yes. Yes does not necessarily mean I agree. It doesn't mean it's a good idea. It could be a horrible idea. You can, if your kids come up to you and say, can I have a cookie before dinner? No is one answer, but you can also say, or can I have a cookie? Yes, you can have one after dinner. So having your first move be yes, and then responding has the impact of acknowledging. You've shown that you've listened. You're now building on it. You're not instantly negating it. Yes, but does the exact opposite. The other piece, if you bring up the last slide, I'm looking for the quick fixes. Even a bad idea, you can ask one question to get more information. Tell me more. What brought you to that idea? You're not going to adopt the idea, but it gives just a little bit of acknowledgement that this person is putting something forward. It's not immediately slapping them down. It's saying that, all right, there may be something more there. Show just a little bit of interest, even if you don't have lots of time. You don't want to hijack the meeting on a bad idea. Of course you don't want to do those things.
So it sounds like we have two things that are going to be important to keeping your employees. One, you got to give a meeting, and two, people have to feel valued, because that's what I interpret this lens as. You have to show that you value them, even if they're giving information that you disagree with or aren't going to use, because just the fact that you took the time to listen, which leads me to point number 3. Isn't this about active listening? Like, isn't that the skill that you have to develop as a leader?
Yeah, active listening is important. It's critical. And I think right now, most people are dealing with managing and communicating virtually, which is much like a really difficult skill, right? Like, how do I ensure that on this Zoom call, Chad knows that like I'm listening and that I care and that I'm trying to give him a direct action afterwards? Most managers were never given a class on how to manage remotely in the face of a pandemic. And so a lot of them are sliding around. All
right, Chad, tips and tricks. What you do?
Here you go. Communicating, it really actually is listening. And like when I say listen, I mean if you're a manager and you're actually having a one-on-one with your direct report, how much of that one-on-one are you speaking? How much of that one-on-one while your direct report is talking to you are you looking on your other monitor at an email, right? Like, quantify the amount of attention that you're actually giving your person after the meeting. If you could score yourself, man, I just talked to Joe for 30 minutes. How many things were I doing while he was talking? And what was the last thing that he said to me on the call, right? And that's a simple trick just in active listening, remembering the last word in a sentence, right? And because it causes your brain to have to focus on the last thing that someone said. And the next thing really with just communicating and managing internally is setting up realistic goals for engaging with your team, because you can't walk down the hall anymore to talk to Ken because he's not there. So how often do you want to do check-ins? And the problem right now is that a lot of people are having too many check-ins, where it's just like we're having meeting after meeting after meeting on Zoom, and I'm burnt out. And so getting that ratio correct, I think, is really important. Quick question just to the group. As you guys have been sitting, for the last 5 months, sheltered in place, where do you see most people complaining about their manager's style?
That's to me, that's the thing. I also want to go back to the tips and tricks. I think there's some other fun ones. I don't think that people, by and large, do complain, actively complain, and that's part of the difficulty of the time we're in, right? Usually, you can see some level of body language. Well, hopefully, if you're paying attention, particularly if you're a manager, you're watching your team and getting a sense of the room. That's harder. And it's also a time when people are often feeling more alienated, more frustrated, lonelier. Outside of this, that's the baggage that almost everyone's bringing in. Are people going to actively communicate to their superior directly that they're feeling these ways? Not typically. So to me, the onus is on that leader to recognize, in general, for any meeting, but in particular in this environment, that's likely going to be the case. So I'm going to make the extra effort to create that environment of psychological safety, which in this context, there's psychological safety you hear about in colleges where you have safe spaces so people don't have to confront difficult ideas. This is not that. A psychologically safe space in a meeting simply means I'm comfortable enough to be myself and offer up my thoughts and ideas without fear of negative repercussion. So getting back to some of those tips and tricks, things that.
Well, before you go, Ken, I want to add on to what you're just saying, because I think practically, and I'll give our own example. So before this call, there were two embarrassing things that Ken and Chad had joked about. And we made a comment. We're like, we don't want to put that on a live show because it's going to be broadcast to everybody. And at the same time, it'll be on YouTube and you'll never, ever be able to get rid of it or So, but the point is, I think that's actually one of the problems we're having with all these Zoom, Microsoft Team, whatever meetings, is that people recognize that what you say may be indelibly written against you forever. And I think the reason people then are a little bit more afraid of speaking up, and it's much easier to be passive than active. And I worry that you're not getting the active feedback that you need, that you might get in a physical one-on-one setting, because it's not like you're, in an office conference room because everything's being recorded. I don't know. That would be a thought I would have.
Yeah, I think in a lot of the one-on-one conversations that I'm having with people, because they're being held within a zone of coaching confidentiality, they're sharing a lot of things with me about their boss and about their workplace and about projects and just how hard it is to be in these unpredictable environments where you can't make plans because something could happen tomorrow that shuts down half of what you were working on. Like, it's just a very, very difficult, uncertain time. And then the person almost always says, but I should be grateful I have a job. And nobody's going to speak to their boss and say, I really wish that you would actively, constructively respond to me more often, when they are having this feeling of, I should just be grateful that I am employed and that I can do my job from home and that, everybody is safe in my family. So there's a real hesitation to share what's really going on outside of these confidential spaces.
By the way, that's the fear and greed element from my perspective. That's what's
right
in the background.
People are imposing that on themselves, right? It's not just the manager.
Yeah.
And Joe, to highlight yes, this is what everyone's bringing in, and I agree. It's exacerbated. It's exacerbated when you can see yourself on screen. You become more self-conscious. That makes it feel less safe anyway. The way the manager reacts or presents him or herself. I have an anecdote. So I used to run a very large summer camp, 1,500 kids and 500 staff members. We had 85 people on our lifeguard staff. And I remember walking by. It's the third week of camp. It's a Thursday, and I just had an idea that, you know what? I need to get a haircut on Saturday. And I stopped, and I wrote it down on my little to-do list. Saturday, haircut. And I kept walking. People on the lifeguard staff saw me do that. And it took less than 5 minutes for the rumor to spread that the top two people were getting fired. No one ever told me this. People were sure for a week and a half that these people lost their jobs because there was something ambiguous. I just stopped and wrote something down and walked. Managers kid themselves if they think that they're really, really getting that kind of feedback. The most open manager in the world is not going to get the full range of feedback. Therefore, as a manager, for me at least, I take it upon myself to recognize that and do everything I can to create that open environment. Make sure there's active listening and use every listening trick in the book to make people feel more heard, more comfortable, and particularly in this environment.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's also important that we note that there are really great managers out there that are doing an incredible job of managing their teams remotely. I can say for where I work, and granted, we're shrouded in positive psychology and creating a safe space. But I know that when my manager, like, she asks for feedback, I can give her direct feedback for two reasons. One, like, I know that she believes that I'm a high performer, and I know that she's going to take that and actually implement it. And like, those two things are really important for the dynamic of the conversation. Because if I think, and I've been in situations where like someone's like, give me feedback. I gave them feedback. And then the word went around that, oh man, like Chad actually told this person what they were doing wrong. You can't do that. So how much does your employee actually trust you, right? And like, for instance, for Ken may have been the nicest guy in the world, but if he walked around and people were afraid of him to the point where he wrote something down that they thought they were getting fired, right? What was Ken maybe not aware of what he was doing, right? Because like that speaks to the gravity of the power that he wields. And so I also think managers don't think about how much they impact their employees, because when the day's over, like what do me and my wife talk about at dinner? Our managers, right? Like what were the highlights and lowlights of that day? And if the conversation is more negative than positive, that's going to impact like everything.
Yeah, so many good points in there. We are exquisitely attuned to the emotional state of our managers, and everything that they do resonates with us. We know that there is some science around emotional contagion, and that we can feel this up to 3 degrees of separation. This is the work done by Nick Christakis and his team, and he wrote this book, Connected, about it. But what the research is starting to show now is that we are even more sensitive to our emotions, our managers' emotional states, which means that if we go and say something good to our manager and our manager doesn't respond to it in a positive or beneficial way, we're going to feel that even more than if we had said something like that to a coworker. And when our manager responds in a positive way, we're going to feel that even more than if we had shared that with a coworker. So managers need to be very aware of this. They do have outsized impacts on the people who report to them.
Yeah.
And Matt Killington's work shows that the time that we are least happy is when we're with our managers. But going back to, we're talking about some of the concrete strategies. I don't love, we talk about active listening, and it's listening is critically important. Active listening tends to be the repeat back what you heard, which is good, but I don't think it's enough, because it can take us out of the moment. And you really do want to be listening. Do you guys have any other strategies for some of the quick fixes for people to give them an instant boost to their listening?
So I hear you asking about quick boost for active listening.
There you go.
Well, actually, I heard one the other day. So yes. we run another show called the Agile Dashboard with Duke. And we had the chief inspector, who's the head of safety for United Airlines. And he actually said that one of his things that he does, he's trying to emulate the research he said here without knowing the research. He said it's a 4-step process. But the first thing is, anytime somebody gives him information, he stops, he listens, he considers, and then he responds. And he says it's a deliberate process. Because he doesn't want to just be dismissive, and he doesn't want to just say the first thing that comes to the mind, because that's the other thing, which is, even if you're listening and you're being dismissive of what they're saying, I think whatever you call that, the active something.
Active deconstructive.
Active deconstructive, but without realizing it, because you might listen, but then still be dismissive. So he's like, show consideration that you thought it through, then respond. But that just takes a lot of effort.
Well, there's some very concrete behavioral things that a manager can do that work even across, Zoom or Teams or whatever. And one is to clear the distractions. When somebody's making that bid for attention, they want you to focus on something, take the phone, turn it face down, put it away, get rid of it, right? Close the other tabs, give them your attention. The other thing that works is to actually turn towards the person, so that you're not kind of having these sideways conversations or something.
Right.
Sometimes that's tricky with 2 monitors, right? Because your camera's on one, video on the other. You're having a conversation with the side of somebody's head.
Yeah.
Just
or they're like that.
Or one of these.
Yeah.
Be aware of the body language that you're sending to somebody else.
Exactly.
I'm feeling heard here, people.
I'm sorry. What were you saying again, Lisa?
But you've got to be so aware of that, because when your body language, when you're turning towards, when you get rid of the distractions, you're communicating to the other person, I am listening to you, I am intently listening to you, then you actually do listen to them because you have set yourself up to do that in a physical way. Your brain's going to be much more engaged.
But what about if you're stressed? Like, what do you do if you're like, as you know, as you said, there's the social implications of the managers. They're under stress too. How do you deal with this when you're stressed?
So,
Well, that's. Go ahead, Ken.
Joe, do you know Doug Breeden, who was the former dean of Fuqua?
Yeah, I met him a long time ago. Yeah.
He used to run meetings where he had a pad and he would invite people to speak. And he would simply write down what they're saying.
Yeah.
And he would this was amazing. You could not feel more heard, more respected. As he's writing things down, he's looking at what he's writing, and it forms other questions where he becomes a gentle interviewer. An interviewer because he wants to know. And he would do that for each person. That might spark a discussion, or that might spark the pad. And I've started doing this myself, not often enough. And after this, I'm really going to amp up this game. But by writing it down, you can lose a little bit of the flow of the conversation, but you're certainly signaling deep intent. You're stopping, thinking, and I'm only focusing on what you're saying, rather than the voice in my head that's trying to come up with the next response.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, I want to put a pin in that because that's really important. But in the situation that Joe's talking about, what do you do, Ken, when like you're entering that meeting? The CEO just said, Ken, like we're 40% behind our forecast number for the quarter. You know, it's over at Friday. Today, it's Wednesday night. Like, how do you cope with that stress while still trying to, take effective notes and things like that?
So there's no strategy that's applicable to all situations. You got 9 clubs in your bag.
Can I throw 3 ideas really quickly
Sure.
out there?
Yeah.
One is, it's okay to tell somebody this is not a good time,
Hmm.
right? Maybe
Yep.
not your CEO, but someone comes to the door, hey, you got a few minutes, say, you know what? I'm really into something right now. Can I catch up with you in half an hour? It's okay to delay and honor that commitment. The second thing is to breathe. Our breath is really important. And this sounds very hokey and woo-woo, but the research is very solid. Taking a few deep breaths, a big inhale and then a longer exhale to really get all that stale air out of your lungs really calms your nervous system in phenomenal ways. And then the third thing is, you got to make sure, managers, that you are looking after yourself. You got to be getting good sleep. You got to be drinking water. You'll have noticed us drinking water throughout this. You got to make sure that you're getting some exercise, that you're spending time in positive social connections, getting into nature when you can. Routines, waking up at the same time, going to sleep at the same time, getting your 8 hours. And as much as we're used to being on 24/7, that is bad for us.
Yeah.
That doesn't help us deal with stress either. So there's a few really practical things that managers can be doing out there to help them be prepared for those really surprise, stressful situations. It's still going to be hard, let's admit it, but that's going to make you more readily available to respond to those in some of those constructive ways.
Lisa, can I come to that? It's an opportunity to be authentic.
Absolutely.
I could come in and say, ordinarily I try to write down what people are saying. So I really wanted to capture it and deeply listen. Right now, I have to throw that out the window. We have 40 minutes. We have to get this done. I'm feeling stressed. I'm sure you are too. Let's get down to it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of managers are terrified that if they do that, they're not going to show themselves as strong, capable of anything, figurehead. Everyone knows this. Everyone sees a change in behavior. Calling out the elephant in the room can be very helpful.
And
pulling out your own elephant in the room. Pulling out somebody else's elephant in the room has to be done with great care.
Well, and admitting and labeling your emotions does 2 things, because number one, labeling your own emotions diminishes their power and impact. And the other is that it does allow you to move on. It builds that respect and the trust, because the other person is going to appreciate how self-aware you are and how you're able to calmly say, I'm feeling really anxious right now, or I'm feeling really upset about this. And moving on, you're a great role model when you do that.
What I think is really interesting is that, some of the initial work on ACR, Active Constructive Response, was really in parallel with relationships and marriages, right? And how long those lasted. And it's amazing the parallels between marriage and manager to direct report relationship. But Joe started off this conversation talking about, I make that knock, the person asks the question, the manager dismisses them. The beauty of when a manager is stressed is that they have vulnerability. If they've actually built up enough social capital that for those 10 knocks that I knocked, you listened every time. I was engaged with you. So the time that you do say, hey, I'm stressed and I really need to focus on this, there's enough built up that I can give you that space, and you can give yourself that space to be vulnerable and to be imperfect. But a lot of the times, the stress that the manager gives, there's not enough ratio or history of positivity or positive social capital where I'm going to, that emotional response isn't going to leave me more stressed out. But it's incredible what happens when I can see your stress as a manager, you give me that vulnerability, and then we can still have an exchange. You actually strengthen that relationship even more, just like you would in a relationship. When you can be, we all know, if you're vulnerable with your partner and then that response back is understanding and moving forward, it feels amazing versus saying, hey, like I had a really shitty day today. And if the response is, hey, I thought you said dinner was going to be ready at 7, that derail the entire exchange, right? And so I think managers have to think about the portfolio of interactions they've had to that date, so that when that stress does come, it's not actually going to be a negative experience for their team.
So it seems like at the base level, there's like authority, and then you're building either what you're calling that positive capital or trust. And without that, a lot of this doesn't work, because it seems like you can have no trust with your employee because you've said, oh, I'm busy now, I'll talk to you in 30 minutes, and then you blow them off in 30 minutes, and you keep doing that. Then the next time they come in, that's essentially a deconstructive response, even if you're listening to them. So there still needs to be some deposits to that bank account over time if this is going to work. Does that make sense, or is that research?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Completely.
And we're talking about the research, and Chad, you're talking about marriages. That was the Gottmans, professors Gottman. They could predict with amazing accuracy whether a marriage was going to still be intact in 5 years, based on listening to conversations and a model that was not yet called ACR, Active Constructive Responding, but listening to how people responded when things went positive, or when they brought something positive versus negative, and whether they were capitalizing. It really is a strong predictor.
And
Go ahead,
please go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Chad.
Well, one thing I was going to say that I think is really important. There's a researcher, Jane Dutton, who really focused on something called high quality connections. And think about high quality connections as the conversations that you have with your friends, right? Where you're not thinking about any of the dynamics of what you say. It's a safe space. And after that conversation, you feel energized, right? There's positive affect that occurs. When you can have high quality connections in the workplace, what that increases in terms of your productivity, your desire to stay at the organization. If you have a best friend that works with you at your organization, or a close friend, it's almost like a 70% uptick in your performance. And so I think a lot of managers don't think about the number of high quality connections that people have at work, and how necessary that is, because most of us at work have what we call low quality or corrosive connections, where every time we have an engagement, there's some decay that happens. And imagine the stress of the decay of a corrosive manager, overlaid with the pandemic, overlaid with the fact that you don't know how to give that person feedback. And all of those things can snowball into a really burnt out, fired employee who can't find work because they've just been burdened by years of something negative. And so I think it's really important to focus on, how do I generate, the positivity and the pro-social behavior that's going on in this conversation, right? Work can actually feel like this if you create spaces where people can give constructive criticism, where they can capitalize, and then you can obviously collaborate.
Joe, are you familiar with the concept of flow?
Which concept?
The concept of flow.
Flow? Like stuff moving along?
Moving along in a very specific way. So flow is a state where you are so engaged with what you're doing, you even lose sense of time.
Yep.
Okay.
So engaged that you don't even have fun while doing it. You remember it as having been enjoyable. When I'm playing with my dog, I'll get her very excited, and her tail will stop wagging because she's so engaged. And then after we're done with whatever we're doing, the tail goes like this. There's what I call interpersonal flow. And if you're engaged in work, if you're doing something that you're fully involved in, you feel comfortable enough that you can be fully engaged. You're doing your best work. You're in the zone. You can't do that if part of your attention is always attuned to how is this being perceived?
Yes.
What is my boss thinking? What is this other person thinking? Does this relate to your? We only have so much bandwidth, and flow uses all of our bandwidth. So the more of that bandwidth is being distracted to these other social elements, the less is going into the product of what you're doing and the quality of what you're doing.
And I think it's a great segue into how many managers are in flow during the workday and how many managers' direct reports are in flow, right? Because if your team is moving at the pace of a tortoise and they're side to side and they have no real flow to their day, meaning they're in that mental state where they lose time, the productivity and performance and positive affect in your team is going to be really, really low.
So again, simple question: how do you build flow in a distributed, environment where we're now virtual? How do you get that flow there?
Yeah, the key researcher on flow is a fellow by the name of Mike Cheek Sent Me High, and don't ask me to spell that because I really don't.
We'll try and put it in the show notes if we can figure it out.
I put CDIS into Google and it just pops it up. It knows how to auto-complete that. But he says that there are certain characteristics of flow, and one of them is being able to have focused time. So chunking out your calendar, for example, and managers can facilitate this by saying there are, for example, no meetings on Fridays, or everybody's going to have Wednesday afternoon to just focus on what they need to do. So we need that monotasking time, no multitasking allowed. One of the other things is we want to see the work as meaningful, that it is important to us in some way. And we already talked about that meaning and how managers can facilitate that line of sight between the task that you are doing and the bigger picture and why this is important. And one of the other things that managers can do is allow their employees some control, some autonomy over what am I doing, how am I doing, how am I doing it, when am I doing it, who am I doing it with, because that autonomy is a huge predictor of flow. And when employees in that moment of flow can see progress, they can see that they're doing things. I think about gardening as kind of the prototypical activity for flow. You can see that the garden little by little is getting better. You're turning that mulch over, you're getting rid of the weeds, you're cutting off all the dead stuff. And you look back, you say, wow, I have done some good work here. That's a real show that you were in that flow, in that optimal functioning, and that immediate feedback on the progress that you're making keeps you going. So there's a lot that managers can help with there to set up the conditions for flow.
So this sounds a lot like the conditions for agile development. That's why they do Scrum and Kanban and 2-week sprints, show progress, self-managed teams, picking up what's important. It's all based on flow, I assume.
Yeah, and one, yes, you're right. And one really key question for managers to think about reflectively is flow requires a certain level of mastery, right? So what is Ken really good at, right? I need to know that as his manager. And how often does Ken get to exercise the area that he has mastery in, right? And when he's done, right, what growth do I see in Ken? If you can call those out, right, once a week, once a month, you're doing an incredible job as a manager. And Ken's job is to figure out, I know I can't be in a flow state all day long, right? But these are like Lisa alluded to, these are the parts during the day where I can be in flow. Most of us don't get to be in flow at all during the work week, to be candid. And so like some people's flow state happens after work where they're cooking a really intense meal or maybe they're gardening, but you have to like get flow in your personal and or professional life just for your own mental well-being.
And flow, I assume, is key to retention, because if people are in flow, they're going to stay because they're engaged.
Huge to retention, huge to engagement, huge to great connection and relationships and loyalty to work. And that's why it's important for managers to set up those conditions.
And it builds deep meaning. And Harvard Business Review, Better Up, we did an article with him a few years ago. People are willing to take a up to $21,000 paycheck, or a pay cut to do meaningful work, right? And so, like, if I'm in flow, which, like, for me is talking about positive psychology at work or helping people understand organizational dynamics that are keeping them behind the 8 ball, that's a flow state that I know I can be in. It's because I spent time doing the homework on what's important to me. And so that's another job of a manager as well, to force Ken or Lisa or Joe to say, hey, what is it that you care about? And how do I give you that opportunity to actually tap into that flow state?
Now, these are really good suggestions, Ken.
So first, I agree with everything was just said. There's another element to flow. Lisa, I think, mentioned strengths. Maybe Chad mentioned strengths, both. When we do things that we're good at, it tends to be self-reinforcing. And I wonder, any manager is going to be able to kick off the weaknesses in their team members. That's super easy, super quick. That's part of the negativity bias. We're drawn to that. A question I think every manager should ask, and I used to actually set time every 2 weeks, 30 minutes, to list people and think about individuals and their strengths, because it's so easy to become consumed with their weaknesses. If you can better identify what the strengths of your teammates are, you can allot tasks that let them exercise those strengths, and that exercising is self-reinforcing, it is energizing, it is engaging. So we're talking about, quick fixes for managers. Take 15 minutes and look at your teammates and start writing down what their strengths are.
I'm going to layer on to that. Check in with your team on that, because one of the nature of true strengths is that they are inherently energizing. And it could be that your team members, your individuals, are really good at doing something that they do for you on a regular basis, like cranking out the weekly report or whatever, that they're good at, but isn't naturally energizing. So I think there's a real point for managers to go back here and check in with your team. Is this a skill set that you have and it's part of your job, so you're highly competent at this, or does this work really energize you? Do you get up in the morning to write those weekly reports? Because some people do, and we need those people. And when you can give people the work that taps into those energizing strengths, we get more flow, we get more positive relationships, we get more meaning and purpose at work, we get more engagement, and we get more retention.
And with all of that, back to the metrics part of the conversation, it sounds like we'll also get more engagement, leads to less turnover, leads to higher profitability, more productivity, and less of an impact on customers as well. So again, the data supports this. I know, Ken, you brought this chart. So do you want to make any other comments about this?
Looking at the chart, it's just a checklist of the things that I would want as a manager. I want less absenteeism. I want a safer environment if that's the business I'm in. Want more productivity, better customer ratings. There are things that are not captured in this. Things like the amount of creativity that comes from high engagement, and I think that's in today's workforce particularly critical.
Well, I appreciate the feedback on what the metrics are, because I think that's always important to understand. Although I also do like Lisa's one that she mentioned earlier, at least in the pre-call, and I think referenced in the call, about if you're getting crickets when you're asking for input from your employees, I think that's another sign that you lack engagement in your organization. And you should be self-aware enough to realize that, whether you're on a Zoom call or whether it's a physical meeting. But go ahead, Ken, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, you're talking about measurements. How about an ad hoc one? If you're asking for ideas, have people put them on Post-its and measure. How many ideas did you get from this meeting? How many ideas did you get from this meeting? And you can even categorize them. Are these instrumentally rational ideas? Are these the ones that carry this idea forward? Or are these new ideas? Do these break the paradigm? Are these really creative ideas beyond what we're looking for?
Yeah. And the other reminder as we end the show is I really like this framework, which again, I think it's called ACR. This is the ACR response framework, to try and be active constructive as much as possible, which involves time and authenticity. So as we come to our final minutes of the show, speed round, one sort of simple rule additionally that, if you had to give the quick 20, 30 seconds that somebody needs to take away, what would it be? Anybody want to start? Out of this entire conversation, simplified, most important theme or most important idea.
I'll start. The most helpful quick tip that I got in business school came from improv. It is the yes and. Make your first step yes and. Even if the yes and turns into a no, a disagreement, the very first thing you say is yes, an acknowledgement that transformed my communication.
I'll go next. I think one important rule is gain trust, and you can build a superhero. That's really important. Like if you can get the trust of your direct report, you can build them with constructive feedback, with praise, but gain that trust first.
Yeah, and I would add to that, in order to do both of those, like decide that you are intentionally going to spend time, even if it's just a few seconds, building those high quality connections. Turn towards the person, get rid of the distractions, really listen to what's going on, take notes if that works for you. But in those minutes, you have a real opportunity to build engagement with that employee every single time.
Yeah. And by the way, my lesson learned, this is a continued education, is the importance of flow. It's not something you really think about how it can really impact team performance, but the conditions of flow seem like can have a huge impact, not beyond engagement. So again, I want to thank everybody for your time today. If you want to learn anything more about this show or others, you go to learningcommunities.com. And if you want to learn more about our guests, you can reach them as well on learningcommunities.com and get access. So that will end our broadcast for today. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you on our next show. Thanks, everybody, for today.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.